Hello, fellow humans. In order for us to understand ourselves, we need to better understand our species. Humans have categorized us into generations. Your generation is determined by what year you were born in. At the end of 2025, if you're 98 to 124 years old, you're part of the greatest generation. 80 to 97, you're the silent generation. 61 to 79, you're the baby boomer generation. 45 to 60, you're Generation X. 29 to 44, you're the millennials. 13 to 28, you're Generation Z. And if you're just being born up to 12 years old, you're Generation Alpha. Younger millennials and older Gen Z feel very different from the rest of their generation. That's because you're in a different generation. That is because our world changed so rapidly that it created a new generation without us officially defining that generation. If you were born in the 90s, you're part of a different generation. Many of you self-identify as Zillennials. Allow me to introduce the smartphone generation. Those turning 25 to 34 years old, this is why you feel different from the rest of your generation. It's no secret that society has changed. Most humans are now addicted to cell phones. Here's a few changes that cell phones have had. We grew up with cash, and then we got debit, and now we just pay with our phone. We used to have books, then we got e-readers, and now you can just read on your phone. We used to have newspapers, now you just get it on your phone. We used to listen to music with cassettes, then we got CDs, then MP3 players, and now we just have our phones. We used to have film cameras, then digital cameras, now we just have our phones. We used to have physical tickets, now it's just on our phone. We used to need a desktop, then a laptop, now we can do basically everything on our phone. We used to socialize in real life, then social media came along, now we just socialize on our phones. We used to have maps that we used to read to get places, then we had MapQuest where we print out directions, then we got a GPS, and now we just have our phone. And we used to meet people in real life for dates, now we just do that on our phone. This is the timeline history of cell phones. In 2001, 3G was launched. 2004, cell phones now had GPS. 2007, the iPhone was introduced. 2008, the first Android phone. Things started to ramp up, we needed faster speeds, so in 2009, 4G came along. And then in 2010, that's when the iPhone 4 and the Samsung Galaxy S were invented. This is also when the iPad was invented. This is the year where we full on embraced smartphone technology, and this is when our world changed. 2010. In 2014, the iPhone 6, which is the most selling smartphone of all time. That was released in 2014. And then in 2019, 5G came out. School is where the youth go to learn and prepare themselves for life as an adult in this world. So what I have done is wrote out the year every single millennial was born and every single Gen Z was born. Then I wrote out their corresponding high school years. So the year they entered high school, the year they graduated high school, and 4 years after high school. So if you went and did a bachelor's degree in university, this is 4 years after, or if you went to college, this is just 4 years after your high school learning experience. The smartphone generation, which the core was born in 1992 to 1997, and the fringe would be the 1990, 1991, and the 1998, 1999. So if you were born in the 90s, you're part of the smartphone generation. So you were in your peak learning years when the world changed in 2010, and we all adapted to this new modern smartphone life that we currently all live in today in 2025. Now, more goes into determining a generation than just your high school experience. However, because we're talking about a severe addiction that has happened to our entire species, we're all now addicted to phones. The people that went to high school that were born pre-90. So if you were born in the 89 or before, if you were born in the 80s or earlier, you went to high school in the pre-phone addiction era of our society. If you went to school if you were born in the 90s, you went to school during that transition era where we were transitioning very rapidly to everybody getting smartphones to then everybody transitioning to smartphones. That happened in such a small time span, right? 3G came out in 2001, and then by 2010, we had the iPhone 4 and the Samsung Galaxy S. And then all of a sudden in 2014, a couple years later, we have the most selling smartphone of all time till this day. We're now 2025. This was over a decade ago, and that's still the number one selling smartphone of all time, because that's when society fully shifted to smartphones. Since humans are now addicted to smartphones, everything humans do is now impacted. So all of our culture is now impacted. The way we prepare our food, the way we absorb our media, the way we interact with each other, the way we communicate, everything is different today than what it used to be pre-smartphone. 2010 is the special year where things full on went. That's when we had the iPad, the iPhone 4, Galaxy S. That's the big year. 4G's now been out for a year. That's the full shift. That's where society's like, okay, we're all in, right? And the evidence of creating a 5G network, having the best selling smartphone of all time, after that is just evidence that, yeah, we humans are embracing this technology, not resisting it, okay? So because of that, let's look at how old everybody was in 2010. Okay, and this is where the math really maths. So if you were born in 99 and 98, you were 11 and 12 years old. So you're a preteen, right? So you're right on that cusp of being part of the smartphone generation and being part of Gen Z. 1997, you are the special year, okay? Because you don't quite fit in anywhere. You're the first technical year of Gen Z, right? Now, the core of the Zillennial, I count you as the core of the smartphone generation, because even though you weren't in high school in 2010, you're different. You were 13 years old. 13's a special number, right? That's why we don't have floors 13. 13's a weird number. So you are outlined. You're the first Gen Z. You're not on the fringe. You're part of this core. 13, you're the first teenage year, right? So you were part of that in 2010. Now, 96 to 92, you were 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. So you're a youth, right? You're becoming an adult. That's your prime years where you're getting ready to go challenge and face the world as an adult. 19 and 20-year-olds, you're still a teenager at 19, 20, you're a very young adult. You know, you're still learning. You're going to be in university or college at this time. You're just going to be starting a new career at this time. You might go back to high school for another year. Whatever the case is, your membership of the smartphone generation really depends on how you grew up. If you are the youngest of, say, 3 siblings and you were born in 1990, yeah, you're a millennial. You're not part of the smartphone generation. But if you are the oldest and you were born in 1990 and you have 2 younger siblings, you're going to be sucked into the smartphone generation. And that's how I know the smartphone generation is actually a generation, because it has a lot of pull. Here's an example. I'm a 93. My sister is a 1995, okay? We have a couple older stepbrothers that we met in the year 2000. So I was about 7 years old. My sister was about 5 years old. And we met our stepbrothers. Now, they are at the beginning of the millennial generation. It was very clear that we are in 2 different generations. Even though technically we are all millennials, it's clear to us that we're in a different generation. But that's because we're part of the smartphone generation and they're millennials. We're misidentified as millennials. Are there some things that are similar? Yes, but there's a lot that is different. Enough difference that categorizes us into our own generation. Same thing where I know I got a really close relationship with another family, and they have 5 children, okay? The oldest is born in 1990, and then the second oldest is 1991. Then there's a big gap, and then their younger siblings born in 99, 2001, and 2005. This is very interesting because none of them are in the core of the smartphone generation. 3 of them are on the cusp, right? But because this is an actual generation and they are part of the same family, these 4 actually all got pulled into the smartphone generation. I have a lot of things that we can relate to a lot, right? Because 2 or 3 years older than me, they're 100%. We watched the same TV shows. We had a lot of the same experiences growing up. However, their younger siblings at 99 and 2001, they're full Gen Z. But the problem is because they have these older siblings, they had a heavy influence on them. So even though they grew up in a bit of a different time, they still had this heavy influence on them. So because of that, when they're going to high school in 2013 and 2015, that's right around the time they're in university, just finishing up university, right? So they still had some moments of connection and sharing their ways. Now, their youngest brother, who is 2005, he's full on Gen Z, right? He's well into the Gen Z generation. The problem is because he has 4 older siblings that are part of the smartphone generation, he is very much closely aligned to the fringe Gen Z, earlier Gen Zs, right? He's a Gen Z. He's definitely different than these 4, but he is not full Gen Z because the younger siblings were able to have such a millennial influence on them that they had a kind of a hybrid millennial smartphone generation, Gen Z influence on him. So he's a little closer to the generation, but you can still tell the divide. Whereas these two, they can identify as Gen Z and smartphone generation because they had so much familiarity with it because they grew up with 2 older sisters. So just seeing real world examples of how this played out is very fascinating, right? Because most of the people I've interacted with growing up were a year older and a year younger. And I can see the similarities in how we are all different. And we've always known that as a generation, we don't fit in with millennials. We don't fit in with Gen Z. And here's why. When you look at the high school experience, the elder millennials were graduating high school before 3G even existed. So phones weren't really super popular. Phones only started to get super popular where majority of the people in your high school, including your 9, 10, 11, and 12s, all had a cell phone. That didn't happen until late 80s, early 90s, right? That's when everybody kind of had a cell phone. Now, I was in high school in 2007. That's when I entered grade 9. I didn't get my first cell phone until 2008. I was going into grade 10. That's when I got my first cell phone. Now, I remember I was one of the later people to get a cell phone. So I was definitely already in the school when majority had a cell phone. But cell phones were very different back then. We weren't addicted to them like we are today because they were basically just a limited amount of text. You had to text via T9, right? Remember what that is? And then we only had an X amount of minutes to talk on the phone. Phones were meant to communicate with another person. That's it. Social media really took off once these smartphones started to come about in the iPhone, the Android, and 4G network, that's when things really started to ramp up. And that's basically all came into effect in 2010. By the time everybody caught up, 2010 is the year. So 2010, that was my grade. I was going into grade 11. I remember that year. That was you could tell that the world was different. We were now learning. Our whole elementary school into middle school, high school experience was to prepare us for a world that is no longer existing, right? We were preparing for a world where you didn't do everything on your phone. But during our learning experience, that's when our world shifted to everything is done on your phone, okay? And now, the transition era was basically until 2017. So the 1999s, because you entered high school in 2013, so before the iPhone 6, but then you graduated high school. So you're still old enough to remember the people who didn't have smartphones. You're old, when you were, grade 3, 4, 5, you couldn't wait to grow up and get a cool cell phone, right? Little did you know, by the time you got to high school and started getting your cell phones, you were just getting smartphones because they've already been released. So you don't know a world without smartphones. Having a smartphone is having a computer with the answers to everything in your pocket at all times. And that's why in 2019, so if you were born in 2001, when you graduated high school, you don't know what it's like living in the world where you don't have a super fast computer in your hand at all times. That is an incredible amount of knowledge that is in your hand whenever you want that knowledge. Phones changed the world. It changed how we do everything. And so everybody who's in Gen Z, you also got affected by COVID, right? So from 2000, if you went to university, your university year, the last year of your university was affected, right? The last 2 years. Now, the 99s, I don't really include you because I know 2021 was COVID, but the problem is that it's only affected your final year, the 4th year. By then, you've already made friends. You've already had a university experience for 3 years. So I don't quite count you in that COVID influence people. COVID did have an impact on you. It had an impact on everybody. But in terms of your learning experience, it didn't impact you nearly as much as, say, the 2000s, where half of their university experience was impacted by COVID. And then it just gets worse up until 2007. When you're in 2007, the impact was through your high school year. So it's going to be even greater for you. You're missing out on valuable opportunities to socialize, to build social skills. You're not interacting with the way everybody else in history has, right? You guys have a very big, different learning environment than the rest of the world did growing up. Also, Gen Z never learned cursive. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I imagine it's very similar. In Ontario, we stopped teaching in 2006, right? And I learned it in grade 3, which means the 1997s, by the time they reached grade 3, they stopped teaching cursive. Now, I heard from one of my teacher friends that it was reintroduced 2 years ago because they realized these people don't know how to sign their name because they don't know cursive. So very interesting stuff there. But it's really about the smartphones, right? Everything else, we all had different upbringing, like cassettes. You know what I mean? These people don't even know what a cassette is. Not to mention VHS, DVDs. Now it's all streaming, right? We live in a completely different world. And these smartphone generations experienced the world growing up, getting prepared for a world that didn't exist. So we were in that transition era. That's why a lot of older Gen Zs don't relate to the younger Gen Zs as much, and the younger millennials don't relate to the older millennials as much, because we had such a drastic different experience in our learning years. We have such a different world we live in. Right? I'm so grateful that I'm part of this core smartphone generation because it allows me an advantage that other people do not have. If you're born in this generation, you're incredibly lucky because we are the last generation to ever understand what previous generations went through. These kids will never know the feeling of turning on the radio and being forced to listen and wait for your favorite song to come on. These people will never experience that. These people, that's all. They had to record radio on a cassette if they wanted to listen to it. Like very, very different worlds that these people grew up in. And these people are the transitioners. So we understand the people before us, but we also understand the people after us because we learned the technology and smartphones as it was coming out, right? That's all they know. So they might be a little better at it than us, but they don't understand millennials or boomers or any other generations because they live in a completely different world. It's so different. And humans, like anything, right? Everything takes time, right? Humans existed 70,000 years ago. Well, look at how far we've came as a species in the last 25 years. It is absolutely incredible. And it's important that we have this distinguished generation because it's more accurate. When we can accept ourselves as the smartphone generation, it allows us to understand ourselves better. We understand our position in the world. We understand how we can interact with other generations. So this is something that I've known my whole life, but once I actually put the numbers down to analyze it, that's when like things just started making more sense. And it really clicked to me when I saw this 13, how it doesn't quite fit. And the numbers the math is here. The math is mathin'. Like preteens, young adults, like it all works. So I'm telling you, 2010 is the year the world changed. Smartphone generation, we have a different perspective on the world because the world changed when we were learning how to live in the world. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.